In 1936, an anonymous letter arrived at the South Carolina Historical Society. Inside was a single page from a plantation ledger, dated 1844. The handwriting was elegant, old world, and at the bottom was a signature that should never have existed. Moses Whitmore, proprietor, Hollow Creek. Historians at first dismissed it as a forgery. A black plantation owner, recorded during the height of slavery? Impossible. But the ink, the parchment, and the seal were authentic. That document, and a handful of oral accounts found decades later, tell one of the most disturbing and improbable stories in early American history. The story of a slave who killed his master, married his master's widow, and took control of everything his chains were meant to deny him. They called him Moses the Legend. But legends, as history teaches us, often hide the darkest truths. Moses was born in 1810 on the Whitmore Plantation, an expanse of 800 acres in South Carolina's Lowcountry. The property stretched across marshland thick with fog and insects, a place where men worked, lived, and died in silence. The plantation's owner, Colonel Edward Whitmore, was a former militia captain and devout Baptist. His wealth came not only from cotton, but from men's pain. Records describe Hollow Creek as a model of discipline, which in that era meant something else entirely: whips, isolation, and unending fear. Moses's mother died when he was 6. She was buried in unmarked ground behind the old Oak Line, a place still visible today on county maps as Widow's Field. He grew up strong, too strong, and quiet. The overseers called him the Watcher because he never looked away, even when others screamed. Survivors of the Whitmore family later testified that as a boy, Moses would stare at the colonel during Sunday prayer. One descendant recalled, "He looked at my great-grandfather not with hate, but with knowing, as if he understood a time would come when the order would change." Eleanor Whitmore, the colonel's wife, was 14 years younger than her husband, a frail woman whose health was unsteady even before she arrived at Hollow Creek. She was known to wander the gardens at night, barefoot, speaking softly to no one. House servants whispered that she saw things. Letters discovered in 1892 mention that Eleanor frequently dismissed the overseers and requested the large boy, Moses, to tend her gardens. These meetings, which seemed innocent at first, became the subject of gossip. Some said she pitied him. Others said she was drawn to him, not in love, but fascination. Whatever passed between them, it was enough to be noticed. And in the deep South of the 1830s, that kind of notice was a death sentence. Plantation logbooks describe a curious loss. One Bible, torn, missing pages. Around that same year, an itinerant preacher visited the slave quarters and left behind something priceless: literacy. Moses learned to read from that single torn Bible. His first passage was from Exodus. "Let my people go." He began teaching others by candlelight, tracing letters in the dirt behind the barn. When discovered, 3 men were whipped until their backs turned black. But Moses was not punished, not yet. The colonel waited. Witness accounts suggest that Moses began preaching after dark, not to God, but to something older, something the slaves called the One Who Remembers. His sermons were said to be quiet, hypnotic. He promised deliverance, but not of heaven, of ownership. On June 18, 1839, a lunar eclipse turned the sky red. That night, the overseer vanished. His horse returned with its saddle torn and his whip missing. Colonel Whitmore blamed the superstitions of the field hands and ordered them confined to quarters. But days later, he began suffering fits, trembling, delirium, claiming he saw his dead overseer at the edge of the fields. Letters from a neighboring planter describe it vividly. Whitmore appears disturbed. He says he is being watched. He has doubled the guards, yet trusts no man. The slave said Moses had spoken a word that night, a curse or a promise. No one recorded what that word was. The event that followed remains one of the most disputed in local history. The official report states, Colonel Edward Whitmore was lost while hunting along Hollow Creek. Horse returned, rider not found. But oral history says different. According to testimonies collected in 1931, the colonel had discovered Moses's gatherings and confronted him near the riverbank. A struggle followed, the colonel's own pistol discharged. His body was never recovered. The next morning, the entire plantation awoke to silence. No mourning, no sermon, no inquiry. Eleanor Whitmore did not call for search parties. She ordered only that the church bells not be rung. And by the following week, she had filed a petition for manumission, the legal freeing of one slave, Moses. Records from Charleston County prove the manumission was real. A clerk's notation reads, "Man named Moses freed by widow of Edward Whitmore. Terms undisclosed. Document sealed by order of district judge." This is where the story fractures. Some historians argue Eleanor freed Moses out of guilt. Others suspect something deeper, coercion, or even complicity. Either way, within months, new papers appeared. A property transfer granting Moses full operational control of Hollow Creek's cotton production. At that time, this was legally impossible. Yet the documents were signed, witnessed, and sealed. And just 1 year later, a marriage license surfaced. April 2nd, 1844, recorded quietly in the courthouse ledger. Marriage between Moses Whitmore and Eleanor Whitmore. No pastor officiated. No witnesses are listed. The line for the officiant's name is blank. But the county seal is genuine. It's here that the legend takes full form. The slave who became the master, the widow who married her husband's killer. By that summer, Hollow Creek Plantation was operational again, under new ownership, Mr. Moses Whitmore. And for the first time in the South, field hands were paid wages. But they were not allowed to leave. Neighbors described strange lights across the fields, hymns sung past midnight, and a constant low hum that carried through the soil. When asked what it was, one freedman replied, "It's the land remembering." By 1845, Hollow Creek Plantation was unrecognizable. The whipping posts had been torn down. Overseer quarters stood empty. The fields, once full of cries, now echoed only with the sound of tools and song. But the change came with a cost. Letters from nearby landowners complained of unnatural practices at Hollow Creek. They claimed the workers labored at night by torchlight, harvesting under the full moon. Others said Moses forbade the church bell to ring ever again. He installed mirrors inside the main house, hundreds of them. Large, small, broken, whole. Every hallway reflected his image. Visitors described it as like walking through a memory that didn't belong to you. Plantation ledgers reveal that production nearly tripled. No whips, no chains, and yet no one left. The workers stayed willingly, some said fearfully. A surviving letter from a neighboring planter reads, "His men do not tire. They move as one. I do not know if it is devotion or something worse." Eleanor Whitmore, once pale and fragile, began to deteriorate. Visitors described her as thin, translucent, barely breathing. A physician's record from Charleston notes, "Patient's pulse irregular. Eyes open during sleep. Skin cold to touch. Husband refuses laudanum treatment." Moses claimed she was recovering through natural faith. But servants whispered that she had not eaten in weeks. They said he would sit beside her, reciting verses, not from the Bible, but from memory, in a language no one recognized. When the preacher from town demanded entry to perform a blessing, Moses refused. He said the house had already been blessed, once, and enough. By the winter of 1846, Eleanor was seen only at night, standing in the upstairs window. Locals who passed the plantation swore she was mouthing something, the same phrase, over and over. "Do not leave the door open." In April 1847, the Hollow Creek congregation voted to excommunicate Moses Whitmore. The accusation, heresy. A circuit minister recorded, "He denies salvation through Christ, claiming instead that man redeems himself by mastering his oppressor's house." A delegation of church elders rode to Hollow Creek to confront him. Only one returned. The survivor's statement, preserved in the diocese archives, reads simply, "He welcomed us, offered wine. The others drank. I did not. I saw Eleanor's portrait move. Her eyes were open, but the painter had closed them." When authorities investigated weeks later, they found no bodies, only a locked room lined with mirrors and a single black Bible on the floor. Every page was blank except the first, Exodus 12, verse 29. "And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn." On the morning of March 9th, 1848, a column of smoke rose from Hollow Creek. The main house burned for 6 hours. No one tried to stop it. When it was over, Moses stood in the field watching the ashes. He did not weep. He did not speak. Eleanor's body was found in the parlor, seated upright, unburned. her hands folded neatly in her lap. The coroner's report lists the cause of death as shock, unspecified. But locals believed something else, that she died before the fire ever started. The same day, Moses ordered the mirrors buried. One by one, they were shattered and lowered into the earth. He left only one intact, above his bed. After the fire, Hollow Creek entered its strangest period. The plantation flourished. Cotton output broke every record. Yet no one saw wagons leave or ships arrive. The cotton seemed to vanish into the marshes, sold through names that didn't exist. Moses, now calling himself Mr. Whitmore, began buying land, not just acres, but families. Freedmen, runaways, even debtors worked his fields. All paid, all fed, all bound by silence. No visitors were allowed after sunset. By then, locals called the property the place where dawn avoids. An 1852 letter from a traveling merchant described the atmosphere. The air there feels thick. I could not hear birds. His men watched me from the trees, still as stone. They say Mr. Whitmore does not sleep. He walks the fields counting something, though no one knows what. When the Civil War erupted, Hollow Creek stood apart. Both Confederate and Union troops passed near the property. Neither claimed it. Maps from the time show a blank space where the plantation should have been. Confederate scouts who entered the marshes never returned. Union reports later mention unexplained fires and the smell of iron and blood. According to folklore collected in 1904, Moses made a bargain with both sides. He would supply cotton to whoever left him undisturbed. Both agreed, until the war ended and the Confederacy fell. In 1865, when federal soldiers arrived to seize property records, they found Hollow Creek abandoned. The fields were still warm, as if the harvest had just been taken. But there were no people. Only footprints, hundreds, leading into the woods and stopping abruptly. Months after the war, a Union surveyor exploring the ruins discovered something buried beneath the old barn, a wooden chest containing the plantation ledgers. Inside, every page listed the same thing. Names, hundreds of them, former slaves, workers, travelers, each followed by a single date. But where the column for payment should have been, only one word repeated: redeemed. The handwriting was Moses's. The last entry read, Eleanor Whitmore, redeemed, March 9, 1848. There were no entries after that date. The chest was sealed and sent to Charleston. Within weeks, it disappeared from the archive. After the war, the land was sold to a northern investor. He never set foot on it. Within months, workers refused to stay. They claimed the soil spoke, at night, that voices whispered from beneath the rows of cotton. One sharecropper told a local paper, "The ground is breathing. You can feel it under your feet, like someone turning in their grave." The area was eventually abandoned again. By 1868, Hollow Creek was marked uninhabited on county maps. The roads leading in grew over. The swamp reclaimed everything but the cemetery. In 1872, a fire destroyed the courthouse records from the Whitmore district. Some said it was arson, to erase Moses forever. But by then, his name had already passed into rumor. Even decades later, sightings continued. A black man in a white coat, walking the marshes near Hollow Creek. Tall, silent, ageless. Newspapers dismissed it as superstition. But one sheriff's report from 1881 describes a man matching Moses's description arrested for trespassing on what was once Hollow Creek. The report ends abruptly. Suspect released upon verification of ownership. Signed M. Whitmore. No one could explain how a man born in 1810 still held papers in his name. Some say he never died. Others believe something else took his place, something that carried his memories, his voice, his eyes. When the sheriff returned to verify the report weeks later, the file was gone. The ink on his own signature had faded to nothing. In 1891, nearly half a century after the disappearance of Moses Whitmore, the name returned. A census taker documenting rural South Carolina came across an isolated homestead built on the ruins of Hollow Creek. The occupant identified himself simply as M. Whitmore, planter. The age listed, 51. That would have made him born in 1840, the same year Colonel Whitmore was killed. But the handwriting on the census sheet was unmistakable. Experts later compared it with the manumission papers of 1843 and found it identical. Locals began to whisper again. They said the man who lived there spoke as if from another century, using words no one had heard since before the war. He paid in gold dollars stamped with dates from the 1830s. A nearby preacher's journal from that same year noted, "He came to my church wearing black gloves. Said he wished to buy soil, not land, but soil itself. I told him it could not be sold. He said it already had been. By winter, the preacher's church had burned down. A farmer plowing through the northern section of the property uncovered a strange pattern beneath the surface, glass fragments arranged in circular formation. When reassembled, they formed dozens of small mirrors. Each mirror bore a single fingerprint pressed into the back of the glass. Laboratory analysis decades later suggested they were all from different individuals. The fragments were sent to Colombia for study, but never arrived. The wagon driver transporting them was found 2 miles from the site, his horse standing still, eyes open, body stone cold. His death certificate listed no cause. In his pocket was a scrap of paper that read, "They still see through them." The mirrors were never recovered. In 1913, a new owner purchased the land, Dr. Abram R. Caldwell, a physician interested in psychological memory and soil composition. He built a small research facility on the grounds, employing university assistants to test what he called residual energy in agricultural soil. Locals warned him to leave it buried. He ignored them. Caldwell's notes, later found in a sealed trunk, revealed chilling details. At night, the field hums. Instruments detect pulses at steady intervals. When we dig, the frequency stops until we sleep. By 1917, his entire research team had vanished. The federal government seized the property under the Office of Agricultural Development, an agency that did not exist at that time. During a flood cleanup in 1922, a Charleston clerk discovered a sealed crate labeled Hollow Creek, 1866, confidential. Inside were burnt fragments of documents, faded signatures, and one photograph, a man standing beside a ruined plantation gate. The photograph's reverse bore an inscription, "Property of M. Whitmore. Do not open the door." Analysis suggested the photo paper dated from the 1870s, yet the man in the image wore a suit style from 1890. The file was reclassified as Unsolved Historical Anomaly and locked in Federal Archives Room 19B. That room was later destroyed in a 1933 fire. In 1936, a man named Isaiah Granger, 94 years old and nearly blind, testified before the South Carolina Historical Society. He claimed to have been born on Hollow Creek Plantation. His words, transcribed in part, are the last surviving eyewitness account. "I seen him. I seen Mr. Moses after the war. He come back to walk the fields. Said he had work still to finish. He told me, the land's not mine. I belong to it now. I ain't never forgot his eyes. They looked clean, like mirrors." When asked how long Moses lived, Granger replied, "He didn't live. He just stayed." Granger died 2 weeks later. His body was found facing east, toward Hollow Creek. Following Granger's death, a state archivist named Benjamin Hale reopened the Hollow Creek file for internal review. His private notes, later discovered in his home after his death, describe his final visit to the site. "Nothing remains but trees and water. Yet at dusk, the ground feels warm beneath my boots. I could swear I heard someone counting. 1, 2, 3, again and again." The final line of his journal reads, "He's still keeping the books." Hill's body was never recovered. His empty car was found at the edge of the marsh. Inside the glove compartment was a fragment of mirror wrapped in black cloth. In 1954, during a restoration of federal records, archivists uncovered a damaged phonograph cylinder labeled Whitmore, Field Sample, Charleston Project. The date etched on the rim, 1936. When played, the audio revealed a faint humming, rhythmic, almost like chanting. After 40 seconds, a voice whispered beneath the static, "The field remembers. Do not dig." Experts confirmed the voice did not match any known recording of the time. Some speculate it was environmental interference. Others believe it was the first and last recording of Hollow Creek itself. The final government report, dated December 17, 1936, states, "No living descendants of Moses Whitmore verified. All surviving structures removed. The area declared unsafe for habitation due to unstable soil conditions." Yet, maps printed after that year omit the region entirely. Where Hollow Creek once stood is now labeled wetland, uncharted. Local fishermen still claim that on windless nights, lights appear beneath the water, like lanterns moving through the mud. The few who have ventured too close report hearing faint voices, counting slowly, in rhythm with their own heartbeat. What truly happened at Hollow Creek remains buried, by time, by fear, perhaps by design. But what little survives tells of a man who defied his world, who became what his oppressors once were, and who paid a price beyond understanding. Some say Moses was cursed. Others say he became the curse itself, the embodiment of every debt owed, every sin unpaid. Maybe that's why the ground still hums. Maybe that's why his ledgers read, redeemed. Because in the end, Moses Whitmore did what no slave, no master, no preacher could do. He made the land remember.